Welcome to America's Heroes Group.
And welcome back to America's Heroes Group. This time with our roundtable and our partner, Veterans Legislative Voice. And the Veterans Legislative Voice podcast and our AHG correspondent, Stephanie Kalota. Today is Saturday, October 14, 2023. Our host is Kelley. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith. Our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. And of course, U.S. Army Sergeant First Class, Reserve Sergeant First Class, veteran, founder, creator of the Veterans Legislative Voice, and our AHG correspondent, Stephanie Kalota. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm happy to be here for this month, at least.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on in the world. But tell us, there's something. There's a person that you want to talk about, and I think she's a really remarkable Marine combat veteran. Did a lot of great things and is responsible for a lot of things, positive things that are in the world today, especially pertaining to veterans. Tell us who the person you want to talk about is, and also the act is named after her.
Yeah, so I'll preface this because it's October and it is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. That's what the subject is really going to be about, and this is for Dr. Kate Hendricks Thomas. She was a Marine. She's been deployed twice to Iraq, and one of the places was Balad. And she became a really huge advocate for mental health, for physical health after she got out of the Marines. And when she was 38, she was told by her doctor at a annual exam, you know what, I know the places you've been to. Let's get you a full spectrum check, including the breast cancer screening. She wasn't 40 yet. And so typically on most breast cancer screenings, you will get tested at 40 if you have a family history of breast cancer. If not, you wait until you're 45. And this is for everyone, civilians and veterans at this time. And at 38, she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. And she passed last year. And so there was a bill that was created in the last congressional session called the Dr. Kate Hendricks Thomas Service Act. And what it does is that it adds the eligibility for veterans, both male and female, to get tested for breast cancer screening if they were deployed to any of the post 9/11 in the Gulf War areas. So if you went to Iraq, if you went to Kuwait, if you went to Afghanistan, you were in the Gulf War, any of those operations, you qualify for breast cancer screening despite your age. So you could be 24 right now, just came back from Iraq or Kuwait, and you can get tested right now.
I think that's really, really powerful. And she was a doctor of health education promotion and also author, professor, academic researcher. Mm-hmm. She did a lot of outstanding things and was a real big advocate for health, like you mentioned, mental health and also physical health. She wrote a book with David Albright called Bulletproofing the Psyche. And then also another book out there, which is on Amazon, Brave, Strong, and True, The Modern Warrior's Battle for Balance, which is also a great book. And sadly, her younger brother, Matt, was also a Marine and was killed by an IED in Iraq. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's just a heartbreaking story because she was just without this act itself, she was a trailblazer and was a person who was really making a lot of changes in the world and doing a lot for veterans and people in general. Tell us about the importance of catching breast cancer early.
Oh my gosh, it's so important. So military women, they have a 20 to 40% increased risk of breast cancer compared to the civilian population. So that it's so important for military women and veteran women to get tested now. Very recently, I found out that the third woman that I served with had just got diagnosed with breast cancer. So I went on my own Facebook and just started cold DMing, cold messaging all the women that I know that had been in service with me and probably under the age of 40. And I'm like, okay, go get tested now because of this act. Because it's so common that it would happen. Actually, 2 of the 3 women that I know are not even 40 yet.
Wow.
And they don't have a history of breast cancer. They don't have any of the markers. And it can just be so scary. The other thing about it is that it is common even just for, it is not common for women under 40 civilian-wise to actually have breast cancer. But the thing is that if they do have breast cancer, they are more likely to have it to be a higher stage and a higher rate of fatality because it went on without detection, because they weren't getting screened, because they were so young.
I think she described it, Miss Hendricks Thomas described it as, their doctor said she looked like she had been dipped in a vat of cancer or something like that. Like they found it metastasized so bad that it was pretty much all over her body.
Yeah, it was like she was just dipped in radiation or she was dipped in acid because of that. It's so crazy. Because she used to talk about in Balad that she used to actually run and do laps because crazy thing a lot of people probably don't realize, but they don't have to make you do PT tests in the combat zone, but a lot of times they will make you to do a PT test while you're in a combat zone. So a lot of people keep up their physical fitness. And so she used to run laps in Balad with all of the burn pits that was happening there. And she used to just blow her nose and it just would be black coming out. And I had similar experiences. I just recently found out from when I was in Kuwait and where I was at, the location that they were at was highly hazardous and would be against every EPA regulation that would be there. And I spent 17 and a half months there, working about 14 hours a day. And the crazy thing is that they deemed it that it was too hazardous to live there, but probably not hazardous enough to work there.
Makes no sense. That's so
crazy. Scary. Yeah, and so it's so common for so many people. When I was just looking up for lung cancer, for example, for veterans that have applied for claims, lung and respiratory illness related, 40% of all that probably have been deployed to Iraq and Kuwait and Afghanistan area have filed for a claim because of respiratory issues, because of the burn pits that's been burned. And so that we don't really realize how much it could affect everything else in your body. And for women, it's really scary because breast cancer can be one of those things that can be affected.
Wow. So there was one thing nice about what she was doing also, too, is that her service for helping particularly veteran women, transition back into civilian life. That was one of the big parts of her journey and her work. Talk about that a little bit, and also what your experience in walk was coming from the military, and also the concerns you have mentioned before about your health, which a lot of veterans have, even if they weren't deployed, just because of all the things that you can come in contact with the backdrop of Agent Orange, the guys from Vietnam, and how the fight they had to go through to get treatment. Yeah. And it took really like 50 years for them to even get something like the PACT Act. Yeah.
I mean, well, no, that was for Agent Orange, the PACT Act. We were so happy just to get it passed, and it was nearly 20 years after, all of the operations have already started. So 20 years after we started sending people to toxic locations, we're finally recognizing the cancers that they have. It's so frustrating. And for she was a mental health advocate, Dr. Hendricks Thomas. She was a huge mental health advocate. And for women in the military, a lot of times, despite the fact that you may have served enough time, you may have been deployed to combat zones or non-combat zones, women veterans are less likely to identify themselves as veterans more than any other population, any other demographic that you can narrow it down to. Women are less likely to call themselves veterans. And one of the reasons why is because they are worried about being challenged that they are veterans, or whether they are veterans or not. When I retired from the Army Reserve, I went through a phase of I'm not going to follow any of the regulations. I'm going to dye my hair whatever I want. So when I went to the VA one time yes, when I got back from everything, and I went to the VA, and I had blue hair. And after COVID, you have now for the VA during the COVID pandemic, they'll have the questionnaire of, hey, have you been in touch with anybody with COVID? Blah blah blah. Blah. The questionnaire that we get. I've been asked, oh, you're a veteran, or are you a veteran? And I'm like, just because I have blue hair doesn't mean I'm not a veteran.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
come on. It's so crazy of those things that get challenged. I mean, I will admit I look younger than I probably am, or I probably look younger than I am, and I have passed pretty much younger, so maybe that's it. But then women are also like that sometimes too. When my women's clinic had a open house a couple of weeks ago, we had a lot of women actually met up, and we actually tried to shared information because we don't know any other women veterans. The crazy thing is about veterans that people probably don't realize is that you move around so much. Mm-hmm. You probably lose contact with people from your hometown, and you know so many people, but you know them across the country. Yeah. And you're less likely to end up where your hometown is. And so you don't know a whole lot of people that are physically near you. The great thing about social media is that you can have more contact with those people, which is great. But you know what? 20 years ago, you didn't have that. Or 15 years ago for most of you people. Mm-hmm. For those that weren't in college or didn't use MySpace. But so everybody else, you couldn't use that. And so one of the women that I spoke to at that women's clinic was she had gotten out in 1977, and she had no idea about VA disability, that she qualified for VA disability, or that she was even a veteran. She only found out a couple of years ago when she got laid off at 59. And wow. She's like, well, I need to figure out how to make, more money or try to get some more money so I can live. And so she started researching, and she's like, oh, crap.
Wow.
And started applying and started finding out things because she was put in that position. And so many women are like that, and it's so scary. A lot of women that I've been told were actually told in the beginning, oh, well, if you're going to file for VA disability, you're actually taking benefits or the money away from the men that deserve the money for this.
Which is not true.
And so, right, they were gaslit and they were guilted into not actually applying for things that they rightfully earned.
That's one thing that she talked about as well, because the gender bias and sexism that exists in the military, what she pointed out. She had a story that I remember one time. She said that she was an officer in the Marines. Okay, she's an officer.
Yes.
Now you know that has. I mean, for people that don't realize what that means as a civilian, an officer is almost like having like a person in Congress or a person or like the president, in your presence. It's not that they're not someone that you just, it's like you wouldn't insult your boss. You wouldn't insult like your boss's boss. That's kind of like how it is.
They're like an office manager or a project manager type level. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's how high they are when they're just commissioned in their 20s.
Right, exactly. So she was serving overseas, and the guys under her leadership would put graffiti in the porta potties, and they'd put all these little sexual things about her. Like commenting on her, about her body, about her boobs, about her butt, whatever, stuff like that, putting all kinds of sexual stuff, explicit sexual stuff about her. And she's using the same porta potty, and she's an officer. And so she carried around a spray paint can, and she didn't, she said she never went off anybody, or didn't, she kind of, because she didn't want it to, I guess, rock the boat, I guess, in a way, but she would have to spray paint the insides of the bathrooms for her own dignity. And I just found that was so crazy that, I would never think about doing something like that to an officer, period.
Right. And the thing, and when I was around, and the crazy thing is that with me being enlisted, a lot of times they don't even realize that you're there. Especially if you're a woman, because I'm just sitting here listening to these things being talked about, and you're actually more likely to hear the sexual harassment when you're a female enlisted person than you really realize, because they'll forget. And one of the things that had happened a lot when I was deployed was that they would call one of the other officers in my organization, and they would use the first prefix, and they would call her Madam, and then her last name, and actually try to spin off on a lot of jokes that she was a dominatrix.
Right. And
just went down that whole line. And I'm just sitting here, and I'm like, are you seriously doing this right now around me? Like, come on. Right. It's really degrading. It's really scary when those things happen, and it can really cause a lot of issues. The other thing about it is that a lot of women in the military also, you get so numb to it, is that you don't even realize it is sexual harassment. It'll still affect you, like sexual harassment does affect you, but you don't identify it as sexual harassment. and you don't realize it until much later, and you're like, oh, that's what it was. Okay. Because that stuff was just so common. It was so crazy when that stuff happened, and it just becomes so scary. And it's also scary because when there's sexual harassment happening, there's more likely to be sexual assault.
Right. And she was also and she herself experienced domestic violence, I guess, when she later on in her life, which was, I mean, if you ever see her video of her, she did a lot of TED Talks. That's why I learned a lot of information about her. She's a very commanding, very confident, very powerful person. Like, she's a person that projects, confidence and ability and capableness. But to find herself in a situation where she's experiencing domestic violence and didn't really know initially how to deal with it. Yeah,
because a lot of people didn't identify it or name it as domestic violence. A lot of people, when they're in those situations, like, I've known for years what moral injury was, for example. I've known what this thing is. I never actually applied it to myself until I actually talked to a friend. I'm like, hey, I got triggered. Let me tell you what happened, and so we can work this out. And for information for those that don't know what moral injury means, I looked at the definition. It's when one feels that they have been violated, they have violated their conscience or moral compass when they're take part in, witness, or fail to prevent an act that disobeys their own moral values or personal principles. So it's an injury on your own moral self and everything that you identify and you feel and you hold true. Mm-hmm. I never actually called it that or realized it was that, and it was like 11 years after the fact. I'm like, oh my God, yes, that's the reason why I have these issues. And it's so common when those things happen, and so it's so important to look things up, and knowing who Dr. Kate Hendricks Thomas is so important. Please Google her, because yes, her TED Talks are amazing. She appears on many different news broadcasts as experts and correspondents. Before she sadly passed, she spoke a lot on many different subjects, and it would really be great to honor her, for everybody to know, to learn about her.
Do you feel that the military is getting better with addressing sexism?
It's kind of hard since I'm not in. I'll admit that. It's kind of hard to identify that since I'm not in. But I will say, in the veterans system, in the VA system, it is getting better. It is honestly getting better. There's some stuff that they have a lot to, improve on, but they are definitely getting better in that aspect. The reason why I won't say about in the military is because I'm not experiencing it firsthand. I won't go off things that I see in the news, or I see one or two people, vent about online, because one of the things I hate about when people, the veterans especially, go off about how the military is woke or many other things that they're complaining about the military, but they haven't been in for 15 years. Like, if you're not in, you don't know what's really going on and really being felt when you're in there. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that would be difficult for me to actually answer. There's a lot of things that they have improved: sexual violence, domestic violence. They've improved, and they added more policies for suicide, for mental health. So I'll say that side, yes, probably. But the other thing that I'll also try to see as more of a identifier in that would be retention and recruitment numbers. If your retention is still the highest attrition rate is still women under the age of 24, then no. So it's a lot of different things that would give you a good, clear answer of that.
I think it's also really important that something like this passes, because people who do complain about the government and spending money, when you have when you have a preventative maintenance or prevention, basically, to diagnose or detect cancer early, it's so much cheaper to do that than to treat cancer.
It is so much easier to treat cancer. And you know what, that leads me into something else that I really want to talk about, which is actually what they can still be doing. They passed a really great law, Dr. Kate's law. They also passed one to get 3D mammography machines. Sorry. With my speech impediment, I have a hard time saying that one. So getting those machines into every VA. But the thing is that there's still so much more that they can do. And one of those things is what we've talked about a lot is PFAS. and other toxic exposures that has been happening within the United States with soldiers and service members that have been stationed just in the United States. Because one of the things that the PACT Act and the Dr. Kate Hendricks Thomas Service Act leaves out are people that were or basically peacetime veterans and those that didn't deploy to those locations, because there's still toxic exposures that's happening. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Red Hill incident that happened in Hawaii, they're still doing studies, and we're still waiting on legislation to get passed so they can do more studies to find out how many were affected, what are they more likely to be affected with, and what's going to be the outcomes of their exposures. So with PFAS, for those that don't know, it's a firefighting foam that they use that actually has these forever chemicals that leach into water systems through the ground and go into the water. It's kind of like everything with Camp Lejeune that everybody has heard about with Camp Lejeune. It's similar to that, just a different chemical. So it's really highly found around airports, civilian airports, and military bases, because you know what? Military bases, one of the things that they do a lot of times, train. They train with the PFAS, with the firefighting foam, and that will just cause more firefighting foam to get to the water. And so we're just waiting for more legislation to get passed so that, because there are links, there are studies that show that breast cancer could be developed because of PFAS, and we're trying to get the legislation passed so that peacetime service members and also those that didn't go to deployments, go overseas, can get covered for this as well.
The thing I don't like about these targeted legislations is that it should be a policy to me that you just get checked out for everything, because there's so many new things that come up. It's because one thing that I think people don't realize is because the Army and the military in general is getting more technological, we're coming up with always come up with new chemicals and new things and new compounds and new stuff that we don't know.
And then new cancers.
Right, and we don't even know what it does to the human body. They haven't tested a lot of stuff on human body. They just we got this new fuel. It works really, really good. Didn't realize it's toxic, or how toxic it was, or we got a new firefighting foam, or we got whatever, a new type of bug repellent, whatever it might be. And that's how a lot of these cancers and these illnesses come out of, and it's going to continue. But if we keep cherry picking, like, okay, we're going to treat Agent Orange this time. We're going to treat burn pits this time. You should be able to. You should be treating everything.
The other thing about it is also the screening requirements. The screening requirements are so narrow that it can cause people and outliers to still fall out of that area and still be affected and fatally affected. A friend of mine that had sadly passed months ago was from esophageal cancer, and I'm pretty sure it was because of PFAS, because of the places that he and I were both stationed at. And around the same time that he had told me about the cancer, and he was stage 4 and he had already gone through a lot of treatment, I was already going through some issues with my throat and swallowing and same things. So I asked him, I was like, hey, were these your symptoms? And he's like, yeah, go to the doctor. I go to the doctor immediately. I get screened, and actually I get all the tests done that I ask. But then when the Dr. Kate Hendricks Thomas Act gets passed, I wait 90 days, ask for the breast cancer screening because of the act, and nobody's heard of it. Wow. And that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk about it, was because there hasn't been as much exposure as the PACT Act. And so I had to really push, and I got all the way up to the chief of radiology. And I'm like, look, a lot of women need to know about this. I mean, men too, but women really need to know about this. And they finally were telling people about the act to get them to go screened despite their age. And the crazy part is, when I asked for my screening and the first person said okay, I literally had to go through 4 more stages of fighting and informing people about the act until I finally got the mammogram. So it was a really interesting thing. And then actually the chief of radiology was the same one that did my own biopsy. Wow. So it's a small world, but the thing is that you just got to keep fighting and keep advocating for yourself, and you don't settle with no. And if anyone that has that issue and you get some pushback, go to your patient advocate. You have an issue with your patient advocate, go higher, ask for the supervisor, ask for the chief of the department, and go there. And then if you're not happy with those results, call your congressperson.
Once again, you should be no question at all. You should be able to go into a VA and get any screening for anything that you could possibly think of. They should be doing that automatically, just because, like I said, there's just so much stuff that we don't know about yet. We don't know what's going to happen to the vets coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan 20 years from now. We have no idea what's going to happen.
And I got pushed back after my first mammogram because they were like, "Oh, you're young because your breasts are too dense." And I'm like, my grandmother was 82 with dense breasts before she died. Like, it does not have to do with age with my family. I'm sorry. So, I mean, that's not an excuse for me. I need a different answer from you now. Just keep pushing everybody, okay?
Wow. Once again, so the Dr. Kate Hendricks Thomas Service Act. She has 2 books, Bulletproofing the Psyche with David Albright, and she also wrote Brave, Strong, and True, The Modern Warrior's Battle for Balance. Check those out on Amazon. You can buy those books. Also, check out her TED Talks. She had a lot of stuff out there. Any final things you want to say about her?
Oh, my goodness. Also look up the Athena Division. There is a group that actually was doing photo shoots for women, the Grace Project, and they actually did take photos of Dr. Kate Hendricks Thomas before she passed. And they also do a ton of beautiful portraits of women that have been gone through breast cancer. And it's so powerful and so beautiful at the same time.
I have one question I wanted to ask. I've been meaning to ask you this question for a long, long time. In 10 seconds, and I think I asked you this question once before, but I wanted to see if your mind has changed. If you had a daughter, would you let your daughter join the military, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, clear enough.
I would train her and help and prep her, because I've been working on a book for a while of how to survive the military. But that would be one of the things. It'd still be yes, and I still recommend it. It's just you need to know the left and right limits on everything.
So don't leave. We're going to send out the show because we have a few things to go over first. So make sure, the audience, that you check us out at americashd.org. We just revamped our website. It's all brand new and shiny, and it's got a lot of cool information about us, and also about our past shows. You can check out our past shows, also our Facebook page, our YouTube page. Reach out at info@americashd.org. That's our email address. Email us any questions you might have and things you want us to talk about so we can stay connected and also relevant in your life. And also, if you want to reach out to us by phone, you can call us at 312-803-2618. That's 312-803-2618. Once again, our email address is info@americashd.org. That's O-R-G. So send us out. Stephanie?
All right, guys. So keep fighting. Love everybody. And look up everything that you need to know. Have a good weekend.
This is America's Heroes Group. See you next week, 4 to 6, as always. AM 1690 WVON in Chicago.